good afternoon. We are a very prompt group of folks. Good afternoon. I am your host today, Samantha Eldridge, Director of the American Indian Resource Center here at the University of Utah. Thank you for joining us, those of you in person and online, for a special Reframing the Conversation for Native American Heritage Month. On behalf of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and our partners here at the Hinckley Institute, welcome to today's panel, Native Wisdom and Language in the Era of Artificial Intelligence. Before we begin, I would like to share the university's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. I've been looking forward to today's panel, so it's my great honor to introduce our moderator for today's panel. Professor Chung Oh, who will introduce today's guests and facilitate the discussion, oversees the curriculum for the Master of Science program in Information Systems in the David Eccles School of Business, as well as the growth of the undergraduate Information Systems program. He works with the Information Systems team and faculty to ensure quality classroom experience and student success outcomes, including job placement and enriched learning experiences through competitions and study abroad programs. Professor O teaches AI and business, dynamic web development, emerging web technology, database fundamentals, and introduction to IS. Professor O will be introducing our other panelists for today, but first I'll turn it over to our partners at the Hinckley Institution for a few words.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samantha. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. My name is Max Lepore, and I will be your host today. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Thank you so much for joining us today. And now we're going to turn it over to Professor Chung Oh.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Thank you for our partners here at the Hinckley Institute for this great honor opportunity. I want to begin today by introducing our wonderful panelist who is bringing so much experience as well as knowledge to our discussion on the topic of native wisdom and language in the era of artificial intelligence. Right. Our first panelist today is Elizabeth Calloway, Assistant Professor in the Department of English at the University of Utah and affiliated faculty with the Environmental Humanities Graduate Program. Her book, Eden's Endemics, Narratives of Biodiversity on Earth and Beyond, investigates the stories we tell in literature and science about multiplicity of life on Earth. Her current book project looks at the relationship between AI and the natural environment. Wow, it's awesome. She was a selected participant in the National Humanities Center's program in Responsible AI, for which she has developed 3 classes that look at AI from a humanities perspective. Dr. Calloway has published articles on digital humanities, climate change, and the speculative ecosystems of science fiction. Our second panelist is Justin Carpenter, an assistant professor of English at the University of Utah. Professor Carpenter's current research traces the use of the term generative from literally to computational contexts, arguing that an understanding of the term opens to a variety of arguments around the concepts such as authorship, agency, and emergence. He argues that such a genealogy can better situate game studies scholarship in dialogue with modernist and postmodernist literary studies. as well as cinema and other media. His other research interests include philosophy of technology, indigenous new media, and aesthetics. And lastly, but certainly not the least, our third panelist today is Dr. Delakai Livingstone, a postdoctoral research fellow in the Department of Communication. Dr. Livingstone was born and raised in Milford, Utah. With his 8 other siblings, he attended Southern Utah University for his Bachelor's of Science and his Master's of Arts in Communication. He completed his doctoral program at the University of Oklahoma with his dissertation, Indigenous Deliberation, Community-Driven Research, Dual-Role Researchers, and Capacity Building in Chickasaw Nation. He has been a part of both the Center for the Ethics of Indigenous Genomic Research and Genomics and Ethics program for Native students, both of which champion tribal and data sovereignty in genomic research. Dr. Livingstone is continuing his research in deliberation, health communication, game studies, and indigenous methodologies. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dr.
We want to start by having Dr. Livingstone. I think there are two questions. The first one is to help us to understand this topic itself and why is it so important, this topic of AI and language in general.
So there is, just going back to think, when it comes to language, especially for indigenous communities, a lot of colonial structures were put in place, and some are still in place that have tried assimilation, trying to erase culture and language and to put indigenous people into a larger population and to essentially whitewash. And that happens historically from generation to generation. And now there is a large need for language revitalization programs, also maintaining certain language traditions. But a lot of this need, a lot of people believe that AI might be the solution to a lot of those problems. Unfortunately, whenever a new technology presents itself, it's not necessarily going to be a cure-all, because it's something that could benefit particular people and their issues, it also might exacerbate problems that continue to already exist in those communities. So that's just something we need to be aware of as we go forward, that AI is not technically a solution, it is a tool. And how that tool is used, that conversation that we're going to have today about how it can be beneficial and also how it can be harmful, both of those paths need to be completely walked in order for us to make decisions based upon what communities might need.
That's true. And I think raising the awareness of this potential as well as this issue is important right now, because with the emergence of Chat-GPT and so forth, it becomes a mainstream tool, and we need to be aware of this impact. Second question, Dr. Livingstone. It seems that your work has tackled specifically the issue of how these new technologies, especially as they involve genomic data collection, and they have raised concerns for native and indigenous communities. Can you explain this work a bit for us? And if you can, how these concerns about the ethics of this new technology can seep into other areas like indigenous culture, imagery, and art?
Oh, that's a...
Sorry.
How much time do we have? That's a big question. So the work that I did, I was part of a consortium, NIH funded, LC focused, so ethical, legal, social implications. And so it wasn't necessarily, my aspect wasn't collecting genomic data. It was working with communities, which is very different than some historical approaches to research, where it's like very top down. Mm-hmm. The term that is often tossed around is helicopter research. Researchers come in, collect their data, and leave, and don't really interact or work with communities. And so a lot of the work that Seeker did, they did a couple deliberations. There's several papers that have been published on it. My tenure was after those papers were published, in conversations about next steps. And so all of the work that we were doing was working with tribal communities on their needs, specifically research protocols, and also those conversations about, okay, this technology is beneficial, but what are the concerns of those particular communities. And so when we think about advents of new technology like genomics, there's a lot of beneficial aspects of genomic research. There's the notion of precision medicine. There's also developments of medicines and new technologies. But at the same time, there's three big areas that hold a lot of hesitation. One is the process, another one is the motivation, and then also data in general. And so when it comes to the process, how data is collected is also an important conversation to have, and also important for tribal communities. If it turns into being like Pokemon, where you're trying to catch all the indigenous people because it's going to make your research more robust or really unique, that becomes problematic. If you're working with the community and that's what they want, like, hey, we need A, B, and C. And so that process being collaborative with those people. And so generation of AI, it's hard to create, like AI, we had this conversation earlier, it's influenced by the creator of the program. And so if you don't have somebody of that culture having a hand in the creation of it, it's gonna have its own implicit biases. And so because of that, you need those collaborative relationships with those tribal communities. They're the ones that determine whether or not this technology is used and how it is used. Now, the next one is motivation. Why are these technologies being produced? Is it because it's that altruistic, we want to help, which kind of runs into problematic conversations about like the white savior complex, like, hey, we can save your people's culture, your language. But once again, that motivation, is it to make money? Now, is the money supposed to be going into your own pockets, or is it supposed to benefit the community you're working with? Who's getting the lion's share of those benefits? Just because, and here's the other wonderful thing about like a kind of a similarity or parallel is when it comes to genomic research, how many people have done a direct-to-consumer genomic test or genetics test? Well, that information can be sold, I'm not saying it's always sold, for millions of dollars, and medicine's being created that you're not seeing anything from. So who's benefiting? Is it you figuring out where you're from, or is it the people that are literally making millions off of you? And genetic information is so personalized that it's very hard to de-identify, especially because there's a lot of you can just be very clever and find out, okay, they have very similar sequencing, so we can actually find out geographically where they're from. And so you're not really de-identifying, because the larger you get of a sample, the more precise you can be with your projections, et cetera. And so, man, I got lost in my own thought. Because of genomic research and how who's going to be benefiting, these conversations, it creates hesitation, because we get into a realm of exploitation. And so if we think about trying to keep art and culture and language alive, these are cultural genetics. These are things that are passed down from generation to generation. It changes, it adapts, and capturing that, or capturing culture, that type of motivation, it can have a lot of trepidation, because it falls into that realm of some previously colonial structures and colonial concepts. Now, the last one that this last little bit is data. Data is just not numbers. It's just not something that's collected. Data is a representation of the people you're working with. Data is very much intimately intertwined with the population or the community that you work, that you're working with, that you should be working with. See how a lot of my language is with and not for, or not for, and not on or about. It's with. It's this equitable partnership. Now, that data, who controls that data? Who owns that data? What happens the next generation, or this projections or generative? Who owns that data? Ownership is something that's very important, because previously, historical practices, and Western academia is not exempt from this, was very, very exploitive, but also I want this, so policies and laws were put into practice so they can be acquired. Like, we can think about other types of resources like oil or coal, water, all of these types of resources. Now, there's resources in genetics, generative of medicine, et cetera. but then also with culture too. Maybe there's indigenous methods that that could be beneficial, but once again, who controls that data? Those conversations, it comes back to tribal sovereignty. Now, some of you that probably come here, they're like, sovereignty, that's like was it a 10-cent word? That's a pretty old, outdated. Takes up a lot of space in your Twitter feed if you're going to try and type sovereignty. So it really does come down to these conversations of what happens to the data after it's been collected and how is it going to be used. Because unfortunately, data can be used unethically and very much exploitatively. So,
Yeah. Thank you so much. Wow. Awesome. On the other hand, there seems to be, of course, the positives of this technology, how it is impacting us. Can any of you panelists speak on the potential positive attributes of the technology? But also at the same time, let's also talk about safeguards, guidelines, policies that can help us to control this technology.
I don't have anything positive to say. That's part of the
Go
issue.
ahead.
Okay, so something that would be positive is that it's not only a top-down process because it's a feedback loop with inputs and outputs coming in multiple directions. So whenever you're designing a system that has the express intention of preserving something, potentially containing something, the major issue, and I guess this is part of why we're having this conversation in the first place, is that you have to educate the people whose data is being collected. And if they don't understand how that data is going to be used later, it's a real issue for any questions of positive outcomes, because short-term positive outcomes are, they're great. There's lots of benefits potentially, but with new emerging technologies, the one thing that always is consistent is that they're never adopted in the way that they're intended to be adopted, and that they actually emerge through the practice of a bottom-up kind of use. So Facebook originally started out as a creepy way to spy on people, and it still can be that, but it also is, it's gone through phases based on its demographics, who's using it, the intents that go into it, not just from top down, but bottom up as well. So that would be one potential positive that we could see in terms of, rather than preserving and containing these things as though they're static, maybe these tools can provide means by which people can actually express that indigenous cultures are still active and alive and not merely something to be saved and stored. And I feel that way about human cultures in general, because if you put them all in a matrix together and you just have this data constantly it's just processing, and that happens out of sight and people don't understand what's happening with that data. First of all, I don't think we have the regulatory apparatus required to handle that degree of foresight. Again, maybe I'm being pessimistic, but it seems to me that there is, I study generative things, and generative things are effectively infinite. And so there's this infinity that you have to think about with this stuff. Not only when you're putting yourself in these spaces online, and you know your data is being collected and sold and re-represented. I don't know how autonomy comes into that discussion for people yet. And I think having these discussions and bringing this to people's attention is really positive. I don't know if I'm answering that question very
Yeah, I think you are. You mentioned about generative, and then that it means that the AI is evolving over time.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know with the Facebook example, over time there are a lot of factors that actually has impact on Facebook or impact on the future of AI itself, business, government policies, economics and so forth. So there should be an overall guidance in terms of how this should go, because otherwise, if you just leave it up to the economics or government policies, you know how things will turn out, right? So I think having this conversation is very important.
So in a similar, I guess it's not exactly the same, but in a similar realm, for example, Facebook Meta bought Oculus Rift, and they were using those headsets to collect data to produce future products. And they were basically they were creating like, topographical maps of your house. And no one knew about it until people started researching it, asking, where is this data coming from and where is it going? And having those conversations now, at least there's some questions being asked because the unrelenting forward-moving progress and evolution of these systems, like they're kind of indifferent to questions of autonomy for humans, privacy, et cetera, especially generative AI, because again, generative systems, the thing that matters the most with them is that they're autonomous, that they make their own decisions, and that's interesting, but it's not necessarily.
That's true. Thank you.
Yeah.
Professor Callaway, hey, you're next. So in this long history of technologies that we have, maybe it's not so long, but it's still quite long in our space. They rarely resulted in positive outcomes for things like biodiversity and ecology, integrity, health, and system stability. So, Professor, you work with a program in responsible AI. How do we ensure that AI does not result in the same outcome, degradation?
I'm going to give you a 4-part answer.
Okay.
One, we need to pay close attention to the carbon footprint and water use of AI itself. We need to make sure that any ways that we're using AI to increase grid efficiency, for example, isn't outweighed by the carbon costs of training that AI. And we need better ways to measure those because right now it's pretty difficult to do. 2, I think we need to make sure that our technology solutions aren't replicating colonialist, environmentalist modes of the past. A lot of times AI applications are most obvious on the very end of problems. There's a project to detect illegal chainsaw noise in protected forests. But that's the very end of the problem. The person who maybe has very good reasons for needing to feed their family to cut down this tree, and it's not focused as on the supply chains and the demand and the global systems that are set up so that there's a demand for these types of trees. Third, I think we really need to think about the history of expensive tools. AI is extremely expensive to train and run. So anytime you have a tool that is that expensive, you might expect it to shore up existing power structures. Who's going to have the most money to make a perfectly tailored AI for their needs? A mining company or a small NGO, right? It makes an already unfair fight potentially more fair. My final thought is one of the main things I've learned from studying the environment is that not every problem has a technological solution. Certainly technologies should be part of the solution to these major problems we face with language endangerment or climate change. But these are also social problems that will require more than technological solutions. If you look at the causes of language endangerment, you have the kidnapping of children from families and their imprisonment at boarding schools where they're not allowed to speak their language. So, and the successes we've seen are like equally intense investments in communities. Native Hawaiian, right in the 1970s, only 2,000 Native Hawaiian speakers remained. They made immersion schools where children were taught in Hawaiian. Now there's more than 18,000 Native Hawaiian speakers. Same with Maori. And these were big investments in communities and education and people that we're going to need. And AI can be part of that solution, but it's probably not going to be the heart of any solution.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Dr. Livingstone and Professor Carpenter, do you have any comments along that same line?
Oh, I do actually. It seems like we have a few students here. Like, I think about you've been warned multiple times by professors. Like, you can't just use AI to turn in assignments because it's not your work. Now, AI can be used as a tool to help you like work through like writing block, etc. And so that same type of parallel, AI is not going to solve things because of the cost, because of the time it takes, also the process of creating it, and then who's creating it, etc. But it could be, I want to see the creative ways that the AI is used in order to benefit those in that community. Now, I could get super nerdy and talk about how it's helped certain types of communities, like in the tabletop role-playing game area, because it can help generate story prompts, etc. But once again, it generates some ideas, but the actual solutions have to be continued to be carried out by people of that community. And so AI might have a lot of benefits, but until we further explore all of the drawbacks, there's going to be a lot of people that are hesitant. Yeah. And I don't trust anyone's like, no, it's good for everything. It's like, historically, Indigenous people have heard that before about a lot of different things, and it ended up not being fantastic. I mean, coal was considered a great boon to the economy for a lot of Indigenous communities, but at the same time, it didn't have 100% positives all the way around. And that's the same that I think that will probably be for AI.
Thank you.
I think one of the more interesting possibilities for certain types of knowledge or certain knowledge systems to have a significant impact when it comes to things like AI or machine learning, anything that it has a certain virtuality in terms of space needs an anchoring in place. And I think that one of the key ideas that I'm teaching a course next semester in the English department on Native American storytelling, and a lot of the generative work that I'm looking at, you have these autonomous systems that unfold through their own decision-making, facilitating interaction. So you can kind of think of them like an ecosystem. What is this ecosystem? How is this ecosystem facilitating those interactions, and what does it afford? And the end result is always that it's actually, I've said it before, it's a feedback loop of interactions from multiple directions. And interestingly, there are two things I can think of that relate to this, and they both tie together, which is stories about place and and spiritual questions about belonging in the world and being part of the world rather than continuously thinking. We call it artificial intelligence, but it's a type of intelligence that we've derived from observing the world. Like combinatorics is in everything. Algorithms have existed for forever, and maybe rethinking that difference is a good idea. Rethinking the notion of real and virtual, and maybe framing it in those ways can produce a system that has more positive outcomes. And different knowledge systems have different notions of place and space, and they're all rich and interesting ways of looking at this problem. But as long as we continue to think of it as an artificial divide or a virtual kind of space, then I don't know if we can respect it the way that we would our own community, our own home, and so on. Maybe that has something to do with what you're talking about as well. It's just a basic respect for the fact that we're here and we have to live here. And yeah.
Yeah, this is Professor Carpenter. This is kind of lead to the next question I would like to ask, which is along your area of research and how generative machine learning algorithms and programs, how they relate to the questions of agency, authorship, and maybe even authenticity. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, the authenticity part is really difficult because I mean, this is very reductive, but I think a lot of the questions that are being asked in the world more generally are questions of authenticity. How we can verify what is and is not true is a major question. And part of the issue with these systems is that they don't particularly care about that. They aren't. You can't. It's really difficult to train a set of algorithms to care about what it's expressing. Like they can't. It's not intelligence in that kind of sense. So putting it in systematical terms, or thinking of it as a generative system or even an ecosystem, it's reciprocal. So you have to put kind of some intention into the systems that you're interacting with, from both the perspective of, in art context, from the perspective of an author. They're filtering their works down to produce the artwork that they would like, and then they create a space in which the audience interacts with that. And they talk about this idea of outcomes in artworks that are generative, but at the same time, they constantly they're changing, unfolding, shifting, and in the very capitalistic sense of this, you get texts that are infinite, and you're expected to pay money to continue playing them over and over and over. I study a game called No Man's Sky, and it's an infinite universe where the point is it's 8 years old and they're still updating it, and you're still supposed to play it, and people are putting thousands of hours into these things. And the game is equally reliant on the players keeping it alive. So we're building these systems that are living systems that are basically models of reciprocal relationships, not only because people are using them, there's the input and the output and the feedback loop of people engaging with an artwork or a story or any kind of system, but also that the system is growing and living, and we are kind of imposing our ideas and meanings onto it in a way that I don't know if we fully understand this. I keep saying that we don't maybe fully understand the scale of that. It's hard to picture infinity. It's hard to picture, in 40 years, am I still playing this game that has eaten 10,000 hours of my life, and what am I getting from this? And how has it changed and grown? So thinking of these things as models for, rather than machine intelligence being kind of a top-down model, but for a kind of mediation, thinking through ways in which we interact with these systems, and that we are as much part of, there's a kind of interpenetration of human and machine interact in these interactive contexts that might be, there's a pernicious element that it makes everything kind of the same. It all reduces it to elements within the same system. But there's also the larger scale question of thinking these systems through on that larger scale of being people in the world. This is a fairly global concern, and what can be contributed, or what would be enriched if we had different types of different perspectives, different knowledge structures that were being fed into that system, to put it in, I guess, those terms.
Yeah, going along the line of that is how does this, you talk about generative evolving over time, right? And talking about the feeding of the languages and information into the system. How does this impact marginalized communities, like communities of?
Yeah, I think from the question, from the perspective of marginalized communities, the concern is that they become sounded out. Yeah. And from the perspective of the larger data set, this is great because it makes the data more complex and more diverse. And there's a concern there for sure, because what these systems do on a certain level is they flatten things out and make them non-hierarchical, and then you can jump node to node to node to node in the system, and there's no distinction. Things kind of become homogenized. We talked about this before as well, that the question of difference not always being a negative thing, and that through engaging with, and this is how I see the question of the technology itself, the positive and the negative. You have to express the prospective negative situations that can come out of this to adequately discuss the positive situations that can emerge as well. And I think it's the same question. I suppose it's a question of how it is framed. If it's each of these, I guess we can call them data sets relative to how the system would interpret them, are each of these data sets treated as the same in scale and weight and importance? Do they serve the same role or function in the system? Or are they all part of one big mass in which everything kind of loses distinction? And I don't know how to answer that question. That's a question I'm asking all the time.
That's a big question, right? Because the
Yeah.
use of AI can be very diversified in the future, not necessarily just like one big Chat-GPT. Right. How does this? Let's talk about this. There is a notion of overfitting, meaning we want to make the AI becoming more useful, valuable, to give us more precise answers to our questions. So probably we have to overfit the modeling part of it. How does this, I mean, related to LLMs and Chat-GPT, how does this, what's the impact of this type of processes in?
Was that to everyone?
Everyone,
Okay,
yes.
I was like, well, I like to make weird metaphors in my brain to like work through this. It seems like a lot of LLM and like AI, it's kind of like tofu. Whatever you cook it with, that's what it's going to taste like. And so there was that. Well, was it 5 years ago when Twitter attempted an AI account, and it did not take very long for it to become extremely racist because of the input data. And so very similar, like AI, it soaks up what you give it. And so that kind of might go back to that conversation about agency. You have choices to make when feeding things. And the thing that you feed is the thing that's going to grow. And so I could see this being, this could be helpful depending on what you feed it, but it has like to have a very careful diet. Now, once again, we're like turning artificial intelligence to like a living, breathing thing, but it kind of is where you do have to continuously interact with it. And so that's another type of cost to use AI, is that required maintenance, that required interaction. And it might be a little bit one-sided because we said previously, people that have the resources and funds to have expensive AI and be able to cater to its needs, they're the ones that are going to be able to use it. If there's already marginalized communities that don't have access to adequate health care, I mean, why would there wouldn't be funds for an adequate AI. It just kind of goes back to that larger conversation. Like, certain needs have to be met before other questions can be, like other conversations can be fully explored.
If I understand overfitting, it's in the training process, you can train your AI so well that it'll perform perfectly on your training data, but actually then when it goes to be applied in the real world, a situation not in the training data, it does worse than if it weren't so well trained on your training data. Right. So I think a lot of the tensions and the big AI fails that we see are from the fact that developers don't keep in mind that this AI will be going to be interacting in a messy human world that is full of pre-existing inequalities. So overfitting in that case is a real danger because you don't keep this complex world in mind. I just want to say on the language front, some linguists are concerned about these LLMs because they require massive amounts of data to perform well. The internet is already apparently 50% either English or Mandarin Chinese. And then LLMs can generate more content at a ridiculous pace. So people are worried that the internet landscape will become even more mono-bilingual, that well-resourced languages like Japanese and English and German and Mandarin will become more represented, and then minority languages will become even less and less represented.
Yeah. Earlier on, when we were in the room, we talked about this, where languages that are minority will slowly be obsolete. I mean, and this is directly related to technologies like AI and so forth. Your comments, please.
Yeah, I would not necessarily obsolete, just more so that they'll be overwhelmed by other alternatives, or that there's not proper support for minority languages. Now, I say minority languages that are not treated with the same type of prestige or practice. Even just, and it's difficult too, because like AI could learn language much quicker, but also humans, it takes us much longer. And so that's why it's not going to be a solution to save language without that continued interaction with those communities. I think it'd be a great tool for like generating maybe different ways for language revitalization, but it can't replace it because already there's a lot of, I keep going back to colonial constructs or colonial structures. This idea that Southern colonialism is dead, that's incorrect. They're more of like, it's more contemporary. There's still oppressive structures in place for some people to succeed and other people to make sure that they don't get to the table. And one simple example, I won't say simple, one very real example is healthcare. Some people have access to healthcare and other people don't. And it's harder to get access to it, where it's something that should be readily available for a population. I mean, the healthiness of a community, it speaks, if you're a first world country like the United States is, then there shouldn't be people dying from diseases that are treatable. Especially because, I mean, if we think about polio, I think polio's had a resurgence in some parts of the world where it should be extinct. And so that's kind of where I'm at in this conversation so far. Is it's not a solution. It might be a tool to help find solutions and to help bolster already practices put in place to try and to tackle a lot of these issues.
Thank you for great comments. I want to finally end on a positive note, but it's related to my area as well, business, which is that AI is a technology that should be provide more marketplace accessibility, especially to marginalized communities. And what are your comments about that?
Can you repeat the question?
It's the notion that AI is able to provide more accessibility, which means that knowledge accessibility to marginalized community, and how does this impact businesses, small minority businesses, and how they can leverage this type of AI technology to help them in their businesses.
I guess my first piece of advice would be to not ask English professors for business advice. I'm really curious what you have to say about this, Professor O. Given being the business expert in the room.
Okay, yeah. I like the accessibility part because that now that knowledge base, the ability to help increase productivity for small businesses is now increased, right? And that helps them to be able to enter new markets that haven't been available before. For example, let's talk about programming, because that's my area that I'm from, information systems. Programming has predominantly been dominated by large countries, communities like the US, India, where there's huge knowledge base of programming base. But now, because of the accessibility of technology, internet, and now AI, small little mom and pop shops in Indonesia can enter the market because they can quickly generate code, Python code, website codes easily, quickly. They can compete in the marketplace now. Yeah. So that is the positive side of things. AI has brought into their world. One very extreme case, for example, let's say a filing of taxation form and so forth. It needs a good command of English, right? But now somebody in India can actually just generate a tax form or generate a creation of business incorporation form, for a US client, because there's the ability of AI to generate a lot of those. Now, of course, at this stage, its template is very generic. But as we progress into the future, those deliverables or output will become more and more of high quality. So this is one area. What do you think? What do you think about good and the bad of that?
I like your idea that it could be more democratizing, because if you're a small mom and pop shop, you don't need a whole team of developers. You can just as quickly as someone with a team of developers develop things, and then maybe your business rests more in your unique creative ideas rather than your ability to execute these things quickly, because now everybody can do that. So I like your positive spin.
It takes us a long time before just to generate like a website. And also it takes us a long time to teach students to learn how to develop the skills, the coding skills to generate the website. Now they can have the aid of Chat-GPT to create a website in just a few seconds. But the point is then, what is the advantage for them? Because they're not learning how to do it, right? The point is they need to hone critical thinking skills, the hone problem-solving skills, because the problem is not creating the website. The problem is to create a business or an organization. That entails one of the deliverables is creating the website. But it could be hundreds of other things like marketing plan, business plan, incorporation of articles of whatever. But AI will help a lot with that. So productivity should go up a lot. And according to projection, the productivity of AI is going to increase the overall productivity of the world by a lot in the next 10 years. But then this goes back to the topic that we're talking about, and which is relevant to what you're talking about. Productivity means only certain people are going to benefit from it, while marginalized people may not, right? So this is the inequality of the impact of technology.
If we're talking in a purely positive sense, I would say that one of the nicest parts of what AI might be able to help with is actually exposure for those small businesses. In a platform economy, it's really, really tough for minority voices to be heard. But I mean, if you turn on any social media platform, you can see more and more that this is actually something that's happening, because people want. I read a really interesting article on Wired about this increasingly spiritual take on generative AI, and how, like, if you like horoscopes, you can download this app called CoStar, all these things, and there's this crying out for alternative ways to see this beyond Skynet and Terminator. And so people want to be positive and think positively about it, and seeing alternative viewpoints on this and also on other situations, and also alternative business practices are being given more time in the sun of the marketplace, right? You can see small producers of, like Indigenous artists, for example, can get exposure a lot easier than they could have before. Like I'm from northern Alberta in Canada, and for example, if you want to be a musician, you can't. You just can't tour. There's no hope at all that you will survive one tour, because it's so far to get anywhere. But now bands are doing better, and a lot of Native American musicians are actually traveling across the border, and they're being funded for this by people who want to hear their music and see them travel, and that is directly tied to the fact that people are being shown this by the algorithm based on, first of all, what they're interested in, but also what everyone is interested in. And so there's a crying out for more meaningful engagement in that sense. That might actually be a positive thing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry.
I was just thinking, like, when search engines were starting, like, that was wild that we lived in a time when you couldn't just Google the answer to something, and now it's almost a skill to be able to look up things in a way that you can find what you need, finding articles or finding or doing research or double checking references, etc. And it almost, I see a lot of colleagues, a lot of friends, a lot of family that have been using AI in ways that are just, I don't want to say a glorified search engine, but it's more condensed of what they're doing with it. I'm like, oh, I need to fix this on my website I just made, and my friend's like, oh, go to Chat-GPT and type this in. I'm like, wait, what? And so I did. I'm like, oh, that fixed it. And these other types of almost like, what is it called? Troubleshooting. Like, I could see it's super beneficial for IT in a lot of ways. I've solved a lot of my problems. Like, hey, how do I fix this? My graphics card's not syncing up. And they're like, oh, and it walks you through. And so like a lot of things that are based upon like, step-by-step, procedural things. I see AI helping a lot, especially if you're creating like a business plan, or you're like, hey, we need the website to go up and do these particular things. I can definitely, people are already using it in a lot of creative ways and with what is available. And it's amazing to see people, like they're given a hammer and they're building a house. You're like, how did you do that with just the hammer? And that is a positive, is when, because AI is relatively fresh, especially the way a lot of the affordances that have been created with it. And so seeing people start to take more and more, it's almost a type of art form, being able to generate stuff from AI by knowing what to ask and how to ask it. And that's also like almost an important skill, is how to use the tool in a way that is beneficial to you. Now, that is the positive side of it that I can kind of see.
I have a thought. My optimism about AI is directly related to what economic model is lying behind the AI. So AI that's tied up to the attention economy and surveillance capitalism, that's funded by us staying on platform and watching ads, I'm not optimistic about. But AI that's funded by grants and prizes like the protein folding, medical advances, like there is a lot of good AI can do, and I think that the incentives behind the AI are ultimately important to what AI we end up having.
That's so true.
Points, motivation, there we go.
Yeah, motivation.
Coming full circle.
High five.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We come to the end of our questions here. We'd like to open the floor to any questions from our audience here.
Raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone to you.
Don't be shy.
Over
here.
On the left.
Oh, here we go.
So you talk about how AI would, benefit small businesses, but like take like Walmart or Amazon, who have hired many consultants to, advise on how to more efficient their businesses and their operating costs. How do you think small businesses will be able to compete against a large corporation with hired staff that have the explicit job of making their business more efficient, with the added benefit of AI?
Good question.
I think that's to you.
Very good question. So let's say we think about the world without AI right now. So they have search engine and all this, or internet. Definitely, even in this world, the big corporations have the advantage because of what you mentioned, the resources, right? So come with the world of AI, I wouldn't say that the level of the playing field is already level. No, of course, because the big corporations will always have resources, more resources. They have more money, more investment. However, the thing is that the gap is closer. The gap is closer because mom and pops now have the ability to generate more, create more content and be more productive a lot faster. Just think about a very simple example of, let's say, creating a marketing flyer. In the old days, before Chat-GPT, to create a marketing flyer, you need to have a graphic artist and all that stuff, right? Today, I can go to Chat-GPT and use the DALL-E feature and create an image according to my prompt. You can also go to Midjourney, and those are all copyright free, the images that are created. The very simple example. So you can see the gap is smaller. I won't see it will not be the same, of course, because of massive resources that the big corporations have versus smaller companies, but the gap will be smaller. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Other questions?
My question is, how can AI be paired with Indigenous ideology and thought in a productive way that doesn't completely erase people and Indigenous people? And are there examples of that already happening?
I was waiting for the microphone. I'm like, wait, no, I have one right here. That's right. I guess that's me. I think when it comes to the I'm going to hold off on that last part, the question, but how they could be paired together, I think it stems back to that process of who's working and where that motivation's coming from and the data that's being provided. So if I am a big proponent of community-based participatory research or tribally driven participatory research because you're working with that community. And so for it to be beneficial, you'd almost have to change the paradigm that it's thinking in. So for example, like Indigenous methods, I don't know how many people are familiar with research methods, but there's this idea of like quantitative methods, qualitative methods, and critical. And some researchers might couple critical research with Indigenous research because it's challenging a lot of power structures, et cetera. But a lot of critical research was created in response to the other two. Power inequities, a lot of things very anti-colonial and anti-capitalist in a lot of ways because it alienates or marginalizes or assimilates. But Indigenous methods developed on their own. They developed, their knowledge creation was separate. And later on, they have interactions and they grow and adapt accordingly. And so you would almost have to start in the inception of what the AI was supposed to do and how it's supposed to do it. Now let's take an example of like Navajo. The language, so I'm Dene, and so it's one of the hardest languages to learn. And understanding that language changes the perception of your interaction with the people around you. A lot of the like sha is like ma, as my, like it changes, it's all reference to you and how you are a part of the world and how that interaction is. And so if I say shajet, which is my father, or ya, we need to go there, those types of words, it alters how we sit in the space. And so how you're going to couple it, it's going to be very nuanced upon what that tribe wants and what Indigenous method they want to use. And so that would be my first recommendation is identify what methods you want to use, and then also how you're going to create the AI. And then say, for example, you're trying to do some sort of health. You would want to work with the tribe on what they want to do. Now, if there's any current examples, I can't think of any off the top of my head, and maybe that's an area that I can write down that I can do research in. So, but AI is very expensive. So is genomic research. It can be very expensive. You have to store the data. There's longevity, there's concepts, et cetera. But once again, if AI is a tool and it can learn based upon what is fed into it, then yes, I think so. But the trick is trying to turn something that's probably very Western and conceptualization of data and basically recreating it in an Indigenous way. I think that's going to be a challenge that I want to see play out, if not be a part of that conversation. So,
Thank
if that
you.
helps.
Can we have a last final recap from three of you? Then can end.
I feel like I gave mine on
Go ahead.
incentives, and I'll let you two talk. This is a question for you.
I'm still thinking about the question that was last asked. So what first really motivated me to look at the question of agency and authorship was actually in my master's degree. I wrote an essay about two films that one was a collaborative film called 10 Canoes. It was made between, I think, a Dutch crew went and worked with Aboriginal people in Australia to make this storytelling kind of film, and then I compared and contrasted that to a film called At Narjwa, The Fast Runner. And The Fast Runner is super interesting because it's completely not collaborative. It was made in its language. I lived in the city of Yellowknife when the film was released, and it was a major deal. Everybody was excited because it felt local and emergent and grassroots on a level that other projects haven't. But the collaborative, the reality of most of these things is that we have to collaborate. And so the question, I guess, is the first step has to be education about how these tools can be adopted and used in culturally specific or contingent, contextual ways before we can really answer that kind of question without being just utopian about it. It's a hard question to answer because these technologies are produced and derived from a certain context and structured in a certain way. And it's not just the models that are structured that way, but the tech itself is structured that way, and it comes from a specific vantage point. I guess I'm not very hopeful about that, but I have seen, there are positive moves in, for example, I study video game design, I teach storytelling in video games, and I've also worked on VR projects that are storytelling, and they're all collaborative, and they first of all generate a lot of discussion, and secondly, there can be a lot of money, and unfortunately that's a reality. We've said it a few times, it's really expensive to work on these things. And so if you're willing to collaborate and think creatively about these kinds of projects, there is a potential for further negotiation, and it could change how these technologies are structured. But it's hard to say, and it doesn't. I don't want to be a bummer. You wanted to end on a positive note, but it doesn't look very hopeful yet, but it could change. It's kind of concerning, to be honest. But it depends on where you're from and how you see things.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I think number one is we want to bring awareness of this topic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we have achieved that. I'd like to pass the time to Samantha.
That brings us to the conclusion of today's event. Thank you to our wonderful panelists and moderator. Can we give them an appropriate hand? And thank you to all of you for joining us today for today's panel. Reframing the Conversation is off for the month of December. We all hope you enjoy your time off with your loved ones. We will be returning back in January with the 40th annual Martin Luther King Jr. Week at the U and a special Reframing the Conversation to celebrate that important occasion. For more details about today's event and other EDI events, please visit diversity.utah.edu. We hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.